It's a beautiful day today. I hope you're grateful for the weather we're having at the moment. Normally the British are never happy. It's either too hot or too cold, too rainy, not enough rain for the garden. But at the beginning of the meeting, just while we were talking, a number of people were talking about the fact that they were thankful and grateful. And that's what I want to speak about today, gratitude. Gratitude. And this is one of the almost missing teachings in regular church life today. The doctrine, we could even call it the doctrine of gratitude. And true gratitude is one of the most powerful spiritual motivations in a Christian's life. True gratitude is one of the most powerful spiritual motivations in a Christian life. And ingratitude is one of the biggest blocks in spiritual development in a Christian life. God takes gratitude, gratefulness, thankfulness extremely serious. And sometimes as Christians, we find ourselves in a little bit of a mess because we've forgotten to be grateful, to be thankful. And so this is at the heart, really, of the fallen condition, at the heart of fallen humanity, right at the heart, alongside pride, is ingratitude, ungratefulness to God. In fact, pride and ungratefulness are actually very closely linked together. And so when we read in Romans chapter 1, about the state of the fallen world and that the world is condemned, we see this. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Now here it comes. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts darkened. So can you see that? They didn't glorify him, nor did they give thanks to him. I mean, you just have to look at creation. And although creation is in a broken state, we are living in a fallen world due to humanity's sin, yet there's so much that speaks of God. I mean, God's signature is on creation all over the place. I mean, I was just watching a little fly earlier on this week, a little fly, and I thought about swatting it, and I looked at it, I thought, I'm not going to swat it. It's a little fly. I thought, how marvelously made. How every part of that fly was so engineered, you know, its wings, its weight, its reactions, its ability to fly. There's no way in heaven or on earth that could have evolved. You can't have half a fly, part of fly, you know, everything for that fly. One of the littlest, and you know, something we don't like, we shoo flies away. And I looked at it and I thanked God. And so this is at the heart of being grateful to be alive, grateful that God is creator, and all around giving thanks. And a lot of Christian songs, especially in the old days, a lot of hymns were about thanking God for creation, looking at creation and praising God, praising him, and even creation praising him. And so at the heart of rebellious humanity is ungratefulness. If they were grateful, things would change in their lives. If they looked out at the world and acknowledged God's glory and were grateful for it, they would change. They would begin to change. And we also find in another passage, 2 Timothy 3, verse 1 to 2, says, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, and unholy. And we live in what I think is very much a culture of entitlement in the Western world. Everybody believes they're entitled to this and they're entitled to that, and this entitlement. And I'm talking about abuse of entitlement. I'm talking about people that just want it on a plate, people that aren't grateful for the opportunities. I mean, it's not by accident that migrants don't stop and stay in France or any of the other places that they go through in Europe. Well, some do, but you know what I mean? Why are they all coming to Great Britain? Because there is so much that's available. And I think often the people in Great Britain don't realize how blessed they are. And they're not very grateful, because entitlement, when you have a culture of entitlement, you're not thankful for whatever you get. You jolly well expect it. It's my right. It's my entitlement. And I think this is at the heart of proud humanity, when we begin to get into entitlement more than we get into thanksgiving. Now, hear me. I'm not saying that we shouldn't stand up for our rights. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm not saying that, if you're entitled to care and all these things, I am labeling a spirit of entitlement, of expectation and entitlement that would astound many people, millions and billions of people in other nations, what we expect and what we're entitled to, and very little gratitude, very little thankfulness. And that's not always the case. We remember the amazing job that the National Health Service did in the pandemic, and people were very grateful. So don't hear what I'm not saying, but I'm just saying there is, though, a sort of sense of entitlement that can rob us of being grateful for what we all always have. So do hear what I am saying. And even as Christians, we can fall into this trap of entitlement instead of thanksgiving, where we're so focused on what we believe we should be getting from God or from the church that our spirit of entitlement prevents us from being grateful for the things that we do have, because our focus is on what we're not getting, which we believe we should get, instead of, as well, thinking about all the good things that we have. One of the things I like is that song, Count Your Blessings, Name Them One by One, that old one, and see what the Lord has done. Because sometimes when we're grumpy, entitled, not happy, to begin to be grateful to God for the little things can really turn around a daily mindset. Thank you for this, thank you for that. I find this in my life. Sometimes I get, down, and why don't I have this? Why can't it be this? Why can't I have that? Why can't it be this? Why is this? Why not? Why not? But I do find, well, if I stop and think, well, you've got so much, and I begin to be grateful for friends and family and this and that, and, God's faithfulness and all these lot, it really begins to put things in perspective. Gratitude gets me back on an even keel, prevents me from moving too far into greed or entitlement or disappointment that is not really appropriate. So counting your blessings one by one can really help you. And of course, I remember once on Facebook, they showed a picture of a very poor person, and it was something like, what you take for granted in your life, they could only ever dream of ever having. And it really humbled me, because I thought, you know what? Here's a picture of this poor person, and they're never going to have anything that I've had, from education to running water, And I thought, what I have, what I moan about, or what I'm not happy about, this person could only ever dream of having even the basics, the absolute basics of need for a human being. And so that should make us desire to help people in such situations, but it also should mean that we are grateful for everything that we have. God, whatever we have comes from God. And so I think of Deuteronomy chapter 8, and Deuteronomy chapter 8 is a very powerful chapter. I love that chapter, because all the trials of the wilderness are coming to an end, and now God and Moses are saying, right, you ready? Here's the talk that's going to take you into the promised land. And it's like, wow, look what you're going to have. You are going to be blessed. You're not going to be having bread and water anymore. You're going to be having honey and olive oil, and you're going to have everything. You're going to have houses. You are coming in to some blessing. But the big warning is that people forget God in the blessing, which is ungratefulness. Let me just read a little bit of it to you. Deuteronomy 8:7 following. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with brooks, streams, deep springs gushing out into the valleys and hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron and you can dig copper out of the hills. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he's given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands. In other words, don't forget to be grateful and to remember, as it says elsewhere in Deuteronomy 8, that it is God that gave you these good things. Do you know Deuteronomy chapter 8 has been repeated so many times in human history? I mean, when you think of the relative prosperity of so much of Europe and America and other places, and the fact that people have so much, and yet they have so much more in Great Britain and Europe now than their great-grandfathers or great-grandmothers ever had, and yet church attendance is at its lowest. What's going on? You've been given so much, and your forefathers, only a couple of generations ago, had so little, and yet generally speaking, they were more church attendance and grateful with their harvest festivals, etc. But you lot, you've got so much, you don't care about God, you don't care about worshipping God or going into the sanctuary and praising him. No, you've got too much to fit in on your weekend, too many hobbies, too many things to do. And so what is that? Ungratefulness. Of course, atheism is one of the greatest ungrateful philosophies that ever exists. There is no God. You ungrateful person. God's all around you. We saw that in Romans 2. How ungrateful to be an atheist. And of course, these things are important. We think of Jesus, and he mentioned of ungratefulness of the lepers. He healed 10 lepers. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said, rise, go, your faith has made you well. So there's, God notices ungratefulness. But conversely, God also notes gratefulness. And I remember one preacher saying, the depth of your gratitude determines the height of your altitude with God. The depth of your gratitude determines the height of your altitude with God. That gratefulness is a very, very powerful spiritual thing that God is looking for. God hates ungratefulness. Don't you dislike ungratefulness? And someone is ungrateful. If somebody's really ungrateful to you, you don't want to give them anything more ever again. And not just somebody was casual and forgot to thank you. That can happen to anyone, but a real sort of ungratefulness. I remember once giving somebody a present, and there was no reason for me to give them a present. It wasn't family or anything like that. I just wanted to bless them. And they were so ungrateful and so whatever. I mean, not just they forgot, they really were. Yes, a spoilt child is a miserable child, somebody said. And that ungratefulness really angered me, affected me. And he didn't get a present next year, the year after, and he won't be getting any until I see a change in him. Anyway, he's not in the country anymore, but there you go. There you go. Now, finally, in my scriptures, at the heart of communion is thanksgiving. Have you thought of that? We take communion in a congregational way on a Sunday, first Sunday of every month. We try to make it more authentic and New Testament in the sense that it is linked to a day of having a meal and food and what we call an agape time together. But have you ever heard anybody, some of you will, but have you ever heard, we call it Holy Communion, or we call it the Lord's Supper, or we call it breaking bread. But in some churches, they call Holy Communion or the Lord's Supper, they call it the Eucharist. The Eucharist. I wonder if anybody's ever heard that. We're going to celebrate Eucharist in our church. It's another word for communion or the Lord's Supper. Now, why do they call it Eucharist? Well, firstly, before I get to the word, let me show you here in Matthew 26, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, not before, when he had given thanks, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, saying, take, eat, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, not before, when he had given thanks, he gave it to them all, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. He was giving thanks for the bread. He was giving thanks for the wine, and maybe he was giving thanks for those around him. Maybe there was more to the. I wonder what the contents of his giving thanks were. But there it was at the heart of Christian communion. Now, this word giving thanks in the New Testament Greek is Eucharista or Eucharist. So when you pass a church building and it says Eucharist, Holy Eucharist, 11 a.m. on a Sunday, that's the Lord's Supper, that's communion. And they've taken the word giving thanks. When he had given thanks, he broke bread. When he had given thanks, he took the wine. They're taking that when he had given thanks, and they are putting it at the center of calling it communion. They call it Eucharist, meaning thanksgiving. Even Paul showed this in 1 Corinthians 11 when he was talking about how he received how to have communion, the Lord's Supper. He said, I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, Eucharistasis, that's Greek, he broke it. And so this giving thanks is a very important part of communion. And I mean, when we're taking bread and wine, we're thinking of Jesus' death on the cross and the new covenant. It should be, shouldn't it, a time of thanksgiving and gratefulness. Sometimes I think we have to be careful in churches not to make communion into too much of a religious dour thing. I know there's a time to examine yourself, but examination of oneself at communion historically can get very, very guilt-ridden. In fact, some people don't even take communion when they say we should examine ourselves. They don't take communion. But examining yourself is not about not taking communion. It's about realizing you need it. The people that weren't examining themselves didn't care. They didn't realize what communion was, and they weren't grateful for it. So examining yourself is not, oh, I better not take communion because I haven't sorted everything out. It's like, I need communion. Look at all these things. Final words. At the heart of sanctification. Sanctification is the teaching of becoming holy like Jesus, becoming more like Jesus. That's what sanctification means. To sanctify, to separate, to consecrate, to become holy. At the heart of sanctification is gratitude, gratefulness. We don't become holy primarily because we fear. There is a sense of reverence and fear of the Lord that is good. But more powerfully than that, it's this. You have done so much for me, Lord, and I'm so grateful for you dying on the cross, plus, and you can count your blessings one by one, that I want to live for you. I want to serve you. So a Christian that is backslidden, at their heart, they've lost their gratitude. So they're not holy, they need to repent, they need to do, yeah, all those things. But at the heart of it, they've lost their gratitude. And that's why they are living like that. And so gratitude is a Christian that plays fast and loose with church attendance, doesn't want to serve, takes it and leaves it. You say, what's wrong with that Christian? They're not a disciple. True, but what's at the heart of it? Well, there may be some others, but I tell you what, one of the big things that's at the heart of not getting involved, not grateful enough, not grateful enough. So I don't want to end on a negative note. I want to end on a positive note. Gratitude is wonderful. It changes your mindset. It helps you see things in context. It blesses the Lord, and it causes him to bless you more, not just in whatever he's given you, but it brings pleasure to him. It means that you are grateful, or the whole of the universe is just one big thank you to God. And gratefulness is one of the most beautiful, wonderful motivations and ways that you can thank God and worship him. Thank you, Pastor Richard.